The seventh chevron locked with a sound like a vault door sealing the fate of the world, and the wormhole cawooshed outward in its familiar bloom of blue-white energy before settling into the event horizon's liquid shimmer. Sergeant Walter Harriman had activated the gate hundreds of times. He knew every sound, every vibration, every microsecond of the sequence from the first chevron's clunk to the final stabilization hum. So when the sensors registered an incoming wormhole from an address that didn't exist in any known gate network catalog, 9 chevrons encoded in a spatial sequence that Carter would later describe as geometrically impossible for this galaxy, he did what training demanded. He hit the alarm before the cowhoosh even finished. One unscheduled off-world activation. His voice carried through the intercom with practiced calm that his hands didn't entirely match as they flew across the control panel. Sir, we have an incoming wormhole from an unregistered address. 9 chevron lock. I've never seen this configuration. General Hammond was through the control room door in 40 seconds, which was fast for a man who hadn't slept more than 5 hours. Through the reinforced glass, the iris had already iris shut. 3 micrometers of titanium composite standing between whatever was coming and the personnel scrambling into defensive positions below. SG teams moved with the fluid urgency of soldiers who had learned that surprises through the gate were rarely pleasant. The iris held for 4 seconds, then something pushed through it, not broke it, not destroyed it. Through it, the titanium parting at a molecular level as an energy field interfaced with the barrier in ways that Hammond's security team would spend 3 weeks trying to explain, and ultimately couldn't. The figure that stepped into the gate room was tall, armored in something that looked like no metal Hammond had ever seen, blue-green and luminous at the joints. The helmet's faceplate a dark visor that caught the gate room lights and gave nothing back. In one gauntleted hand, the figure carried a device the size of a briefcase that hummed at a frequency the room's walls seemed to feel. In the other, nothing. Open palm, deliberately visible. The wormhole disengaged behind him. Every weapon in the room was pointed at his chest. "Stand down," the figure said. The voice was resonant, precisely modulated, Torney carrying the particular cadence of someone accustomed to being the most significant presence in any room they entered. "I have not come to fight your soldiers, General Hammond. I have come because this timeline requires correction, and I am the only entity in this galaxy currently qualified to provide it." Hammond's jaw tightened. "You have approximately 10 seconds to explain how you walk through a closed iris and why I shouldn't order my people to open fire." The helmet's faceplate slid upward with a pneumatic hiss, revealing a face that was human. Aristocratic, sharp-featured, somewhere in his apparent mid-40s, with eyes that held the particular stillness of someone who had seen enough history to stop being surprised by individual moments of it. And he looked at Hammond with an expression that wasn't quite arrogance and wasn't quite respect, but occupied the precise space between them. "Because you won't," he said. "You're a careful man, General. You don't fire on potentially sentient beings without provocation, and you don't destroy intelligence assets before you've extracted the intelligence. I know this about you because I have read every mission report this facility has generated for the past 6 years. Every gate address, every system lord engagement, every casualty." He paused, letting that land. "Every failure." The room was very quiet except for the residual hum of the Stargate cooling down. "My name is Nathaniel Richards," the figure continued, "though I have gone by many names across many timelines. In this one, you may call me Kang. I am from your planet, General. Approximately 900 years from now, and I came through a gate address that won't exist for another 4 centuries using technology that your best engineer will need 6 months to even partially understand." He set the humming device on the gate room floor with deliberate care, stepped away from it with his hands visible, and looked up at the control room window with the expression of a man completing a transaction. "I have not come to conquer your program. I have come because Anubis is going to destroy it, and in the timeline I have mapped, Earth loses." Hammond stared down at him for a long moment. "Lock him down," he said finally to the security team. "Medical screening, full containment, and get me SG-1. Kang allowed the security escort without resistance, which was somehow the most unsettling thing he'd done so far. As they led him toward the corridor, he glanced back at the gate room, at the now dormant ring of alien stone that connected 10,000 worlds, and the corners of his mouth moved in something that wasn't quite a smile. He had been here before, in other timelines, other iterations. He knew exactly where this corridor led, which elevator they would take, which level they would confine him to. He knew the name of every soldier in this building and the outcome of every mission currently active. He knew things about SG-1 that SG-1 didn't know about themselves. Knowledge had always been, the only currency that mattered. And in this timeline, in this galaxy, in this precise moment of the Goa'uld War's long and grinding arc, he possessed more of it than any being on this planet. Whether he would spend it wisely was, as yet, undetermined. If you want to see more characters enter different universes, hit that subscribe button and drop the name of a character and the universe you'd want to see them in down in the comments below. Indeed, the briefing room on level 22 had hosted conversations that would have redefined human history if any of them had been declassified. Alien alliances, system lord intelligence, the weight of galactic extinction delivered in PowerPoint format over bad coffee. Hammond had presided over enough of them to develop a particular stillness in his face when the stakes were high, a deliberate neutrality that his teams had learned to read as the general's version of controlled alarm. He wore it now, seated at the head of the table, eyed watching Kang take the chair across from him with the unhurried ease of a man attending a scheduled appointment. SG-1 sat between them like a fault line. Colonel Jack O'Neill had his arms crossed and his expression set to the specific configuration it adopted when someone was wasting his time in an interesting way. Dr. Samantha Carter had a legal pad in front of her and had already filled half a page with notes, her pen moving in quick, decisive strokes, while her eyes tracked Kang with the focused attention of someone cataloging a new piece of technology. Dr. Daniel Jackson was leaning slightly forward, the way he always did when something didn't fit the categories he'd built, which with Kang was apparently immediately. Mertilk sat with the stillness of a man who had spent decades as first prime of Apophis and had learned to assess threats before they knew they were being assessed. His gaze hadn't left Kang since he entered the room. "Before we begin," O'Neill said, "I want to address the walking through our iris situation, because that's not something that happens. That's something we specifically engineered to not happen. Your iris operates on the principle that matter rematerializing within 3 micrometers of its surface cannot complete reintegration," Kang said. "My armor's forward field displaced the molecular boundary by approximately 4 micrometers during transit. A narrow margin. I had it calculated to 6 decimal places." He glanced at Carter. "Your implementation is elegant for this century. The mathematics behind it won't be improved upon for another 200 years. Carter's pen stopped. "This century," she repeated. "You're from the future," Daniel said, not quite a question. "The 30th century, specifically. Though I have visited this timeline on 3 previous occasions across divergent branches. This iteration is the one that matters." Kang folded his hands on the table with the patience of someone who had explained himself across centuries and had learned to calibrate the explanation to the audience. "The Stargate program in the timeline I have most thoroughly mapped survives the Goa'uld. You defeat Anubis. You close the Ori incursion. You find Atlantis. You do remarkable things with very limited technology and considerable personal courage." His eyes moved to O'Neill. "You in particular make several decisions under pressure that historians argue about for 400 years, Colonel." "I'm going to pretend that's a compliment," O'Neill said. "It is, largely." Kang's attention returned to Hammond. "However, the timeline I most recently mapped, the one I crossed 9 chevrons to reach, shows a divergence point approximately 11 months from now. An ancient outpost on a planet your records don't yet contain. Anubis finds it before you do. What he retrieves from it changes the strategic calculus of this war in ways your program cannot recover from." The room was quiet for a moment. "And you know where this outpost is," Hammond said. "I know where everything is, General. That is precisely my value and precisely my danger. And I would encourage you to hold both of those assessments simultaneously rather than resolving the tension prematurely." Kang's voice carried no threat in it, only the particular weight of someone stating operational facts. "I am not asking for your trust. Trust is inefficient at this stage. I am proposing an exchange of verified intelligence. You will confirm my information against your own records, find that it is accurate in every detail, and then make a tactical decision about whether my knowledge of the outpost's location is worth the risk of deploying me in the field." "You want to come on a mission," O'Neill said flatly. "I want to go to that outpost before Anubis does. My reasons for wanting that will become clear in time. For now, the relevant fact is that our objectives align." He paused. "Entre temporarily. Teal'c spoke for the first time. You admit your objectives diverge from ours. Kang looked at him with something that might have been genuine respect. I do. I find deception inefficient when dealing with professionals. You would detect it, it would erode the working relationship, and I need that relationship functional for what comes next. The honest version is this. I want something from that outpost. What I want will not compromise Earth's defense. It may in fact significantly enhance it, but I want it for my own reasons, and those reasons are mine to keep. That's remarkably candid for a guy called the Conqueror, O'Neill said. I have conquered 47 distinct timelines, Colonel. I have learned that the most dangerous thing I can do in a new one is underestimate the people already living in it. He let that sit for exactly the right number of seconds. You are not people I intend to underestimate. Hammond looked at Carter. Major, his technology, the armor, the device he was carrying. Carter exhaled slowly. Sir, the energy readings we got in the gate room don't correspond to anything in our database. Not Goa'uld, not Asgard, not ancient. The forward field that breached the iris is operating on principles I'd need weeks to even frame the right questions about. She looked at Kang with the expression she reserved for things that genuinely excited and genuinely alarmed her in equal measure. It's future technology. If he's telling the truth about the century, it's future Earth technology, which means it's built on everything we're going to reverse engineer from the Goa'uld and the Asgard over the next 900 years. Concentrated, refined. It makes our most advanced work look like a staff weapon compared to a railgun, Kang offered. I was going to say a sharp stick, Carter said. But yes. Daniel had been quiet, turning something over. You said this timeline matters, specifically this one, out of divergent branches. He leaned forward. Why? Kang looked at him for a long moment, the first time his composure had shown anything resembling hesitation. Because of what the ancients left in that outpost, he said finally, and because I have spent 300 years looking for it across timelines where it no longer exists. He straightened, the moment closing like a door. And that is all I will say on the matter until we are standing in front of it. Hammond looked at the faces around the table. At Carter's barely contained scientific urgency, at Daniel's focused curiosity, at Teal'c's measured assessment, at O'Neill, who was staring at Kang with the eyes of a man who had been lied to by gods and had developed an excellent sensor for it. O'Neill shrugged one shoulder. I've worked with worse. The planet designated P4X772 in the SGC database was the kind of world that made Daniel Jackson reach for his notebook and Jack O'Neill reach for his P90, which meant it was a thoroughly typical off-world destination. The gate sat in the shadow of a structure that had once been a temple and was now a processing facility. The original stone carved with hieroglyphics that predated the Egyptian dynastic period, repurposed to house Naquadah refinement equipment that hummed with industrial indifference to the history it was desecrating. The sky was a bruised orange-purple, 2 moons visible even in daylight, and the air carried the particular metallic bite of heavy Naquadah concentration that made Carter's teeth ache in the way that meant her blood was reacting to proximity of the element. Jaffa patrols moved in the middle distance with the rhythmic precision of soldiers who believed absolutely in the god they served and had the staff weapons to enforce that belief on anyone who didn't. Baal's territory, Teal'c said quietly. We're reading the armor markings from behind a ridge of ochre rock with the practiced ease of a man who had spent decades commanding the forces he was now surveilling. These are his elite garrison. He values this refinery. He's going to value it less in about 40 minutes, O'Neill said, checking his watch against the extraction window. This was a reconnaissance insertion. Confirm Takra intelligence about Naquadah shipment routes, photograph the facility layout, get out. Standard operation. The kind SG-1 ran with the comfortable efficiency of a team that had been doing this long enough to have opinions about which alien planets had the worst weather. Kang was crouched beside Carter, and he was looking at the facility with an expression that O'Neill had cataloged over 2 days of preparation as the Conqueror's assessment face. Not the diplomatic neutrality he wore in briefing rooms, but something quieter and more genuine. The look of a man running calculations that had nothing to do with the conversation happening around him. Baal consolidates this refinery's output over the next 3 months, Kang said, his voice low and even, and uses the Naquadah to power a weapons upgrade on 6 Hatak vessels he's been quietly refitting in a shipyard your Takra contacts haven't located yet. The upgraded ships become his tactical advantage when the System Lord Alliance fractures after Anubis makes his first major move. He survives longer than any other System Lord because of this refinery specifically. Carter turned to look at him. That's not in any intelligence report we have. No, it won't be for another 8 months when a Takra operative named Soren confirms the shipyard's location and doesn't survive the debrief. Kang held her gaze steadily. I am telling you now, so that doesn't happen. The silence between them lasted exactly as long as it took Carter to decide whether to be grateful or unsettled. She settled on both and wrote it in her notebook. You know, O'Neill said, not looking away from the patrol route he was timing, most people, when they come on their first mission, let the team lead. There's usually a getting-to-know-you period, some light gate travel, and maybe an alien culture that wants to sacrifice Daniel. I have been on 17 missions with variants of this team across divergent timelines, Kang said. The getting-to-know-you period consistently ends when something tries to kill us, so I prefer to skip it. How many of those 17 ended badly? Daniel asked. 11. Another silence. Right, O'Neill said. Carter, you and Daniel take the east approach. Get eyes on the loading bay. Teal'c, you're with me on the north perimeter. Kang, he paused, and there was something in the pause that acknowledged he was still working out the grammar of this arrangement. Stay visible to at least one team member at all times. Non-negotiable. Agreed, Kang said, with the ease of someone accepting a condition they'd already anticipated. They moved. And the facility's outer perimeter was manageable. Baal's Jaffa were disciplined, but their patrol rotation had a 7-minute gap on the eastern approach that Teal'c identified with the quiet satisfaction of a master tactician finding a familiar mistake. Carter and Daniel slipped through it with the practiced low profile of people who had been shot at on enough worlds to have strong feelings about sightlines. Kang moved with them, and Carter noticed with the peripheral attention she gave to things she'd process later that his armor made no sound. Not the absence of sound that came from careful movement, but a genuine acoustic suppression that swallowed footfall and equipment noise with unnerving completeness. They reached the loading bay's observation angle, and Daniel began photographing while Carter mapped power conduit locations on her tablet. Standard. Clean. Then a Jaffa patrol deviated from the rotation. Not random, deliberate, responding to something. And Carter was calculating extraction vectors when Kang touched her arm once, lightly, and held up 2 fingers. 2 Jaffa, coming from the blind spot she hadn't clocked yet. She adjusted, signaled Daniel, and they were behind cover before the patrol completed its turn. The Jaffa passed 6 feet away. Neither looked down at the shadows where SG-1 and a time-traveling conqueror from the 30th century were collectively holding their breath. When they were clear, Daniel exhaled slowly and looked at Kang. How did you know? Acoustic pattern in the facility's eastern wall. The Naquata refinement process creates a low-frequency vibration. Footsteps interrupted in a detectable way if you're listening for the right register. He tapped the side of his helmet. My sensors are somewhat more sensitive than your equipment. Somewhat, Carter murmured, already thinking about what somewhat meant when the technology was 9 centuries advanced. On the north perimeter, O'Neill and Teal'c had completed their circuit when O'Neill's radio clicked twice. Carter's signal for complication. He was already moving when Teal'c stopped him with a hand on his arm and a slight incline of the head toward the facility's main gate, where something was happening that wasn't on any patrol schedule. A Hatak was descending. Not Baal's configuration. The hull markings were different, darker. And the energy signature the gate's residual sensors were picking up had a particular quality that Teal'c recognized in the way that soldiers recognize the weapons of enemies they have faced before and survived by very small margins. That is not Baal's vessel, Teal'c said. O'Neill keyed his radio. Carter, we have a Hatak incoming, non-Baal configuration. What are we looking at? There was a pause on Carter's end, and then Kang's voice came through instead, calm and utterly unsurprised. Anubis, one of his advanced scouts. They are not here for the refinery. Another pause. They are here because they detected the energy signature of my armor when we came through the gate. I should have anticipated this. I did not. That is my error, and I apologize for it. O'Neill stared at his radio for 1 full second. Okay, he said. New plan. Everyone back to the gate, now! They ran. Behind them, the Hatak's ring transporters activated with a sound like reality, agreeing to move people somewhere else against its better judgment. and Kang's armor cycled up to a readiness level that Carter, sprinting 20 feet ahead of him, felt as a change in the air pressure. A subtle displacement, like standing next to something that had just decided it was willing to be dangerous. He hadn't fired. He was keeping pace with the team, matching their extraction route, making no independent moves. But the armor's hum had shifted from passive to something else entirely, and when a squad of cool warriors materialized between them and the gate, with the heavy inevitability of Anubis's most reliable weapons, and Carter understood in a single crystallizing moment that Baal's refinery and Tok'ra intelligence and Naquadah shipment routes had just become the least interesting thing about this mission. Kang stepped forward, past the SG-1 line, and looked at the cool warriors with the expression of a man encountering something he has read about extensively and is now evaluating against the literature. "I have faced Anubis's technology across 9 timelines," he said, to no one in particular. "It has never been as impressive as he believes." The Kull warriors were Anubis's masterwork, super soldiers grown in tanks, armored in a material that absorbed staff weapon blasts, driven by a symbiote without a host conscience to slow them down. Shidun SG-1 had encountered them before, and had the collective scar tissue to prove that encounters with Kull warriors were the kind of experiences that recalibrated your definition of a bad day. There were 6 of them between the team and the gate, and they moved with the heavy inevitability of things that had been built rather than born, raising their arm-mounted weapons with the mechanical precision of soldiers who had never once questioned an order. O'Neill's P-90 was already up. "Kang, get back in!" The first energy blast from Kang's armor hit the lead Kull warrior with a sound like a thunderclap compressed into a single point, and the warrior went backward 12 feet and did not get up. The second blast caught the warrior to its left mid-stride and folded it against the temple wall with a finality that made the ancient stones shudder. The remaining 4 warriors redirected their targeting with the adaptive speed of Anubis's best technology, and Kang's forward shield came up. Visible now, a geometric barrier of blue-white energy that absorbed 2 simultaneous blasts and radiated the excess heat outward in a wave that Carter felt on her face from 15 feet away. "Move," Kang said without turning. "I will hold the approach. Get to the gate." "We don't leave team members," O'Neill said flatly. "I am not a team member yet. Move." O'Neill processed this for approximately 1 second, which was about as long as tactical reality allowed. "Carter, Daniel, gate. Teal'c, cover. Kang." He hesitated, and in that hesitation was everything O'Neill was about distilled to its operational essence. The acknowledgement that he didn't like this, followed by the decision to do it anyway because it was right. "Don't do anything I'm going to have to write a report about." Kang's response was to hit another Kull warrior with a precision blast that bypassed its armor at the joint interface, demonstrating either an intimate knowledge of Anubis's construction tolerances or the kind of targeting capability that made Carter's engineering instincts deeply envious as she ran. The gate was 60 meters ahead, and Daniel was already at the DHD, fingers moving across the control crystals with the practiced speed of a man who had dialed home under fire enough times to do it without thinking. The wormhole cawooshed outward, the blue event horizon settling into its familiar shimmer, and Carter hit her GDO without breaking stride, sending the iris code ahead of them. Teal'c fired his staff weapon in controlled bursts, covering the angle, and O'Neill was through the gate with Carter 3 seconds behind him, and then Teal'c, and then Daniel, who paused at the event horizon and looked back. Kang was walking toward the gate, not running. Walking with the measured pace of someone conducting a controlled withdrawal, his armor's shield absorbing the last 2 Kull warrior blasts as they reached him, his own weapons returning fire with the economical precision of someone who had calculated exactly how much force was required and had no interest in exceeding it. Behind him, the Hatak hung in the bruised sky, and from its belly a ring transporter was cycling up for a second deployment. More warriors or something worse. And then he was through the gate, and the wormhole disengaged behind him. And the SGC gate room received them all with the controlled urgency of a facility that had learned to process chaos efficiently. Hammond was at the control room window. His expression asked the questions his voice hadn't formed yet. "We were detected," O'Neill said, breathing harder than he preferred to in front of generals. "Anubis sent Kull warriors. Not for the refinery. For him." He jerked his head at Kang, who was standing in the gate room with his helmet retracting, running what appeared to be a diagnostic on his armor with the calm focus of a pilot post-landing. "He drew them off. Anubis detected my temporal energy signature, Kang said, looking up from his armor's interface. I should have shielded it more thoroughly before gate transit. The oversight was mine. He said it with the directness of someone who tracked their own errors with the same precision they applied to everything else. He will now know something significant has entered this timeline. He will not know what, but Anubis is not a system lord who leaves unknowns unresolved. No, Teal'c confirmed. He is not. In the debrief that followed, the room had the particular quality of people reassessing their assumptions in real time. Carter's notes had expanded to 3 pages. Daniel had questions about the Cull Warrior construction tolerances that Kang answered with a precision that suggested he had access to engineering specifications that didn't exist yet. Teal'c watched him with the expression he reserved for things he had decided were dangerous, but not currently to threats, a distinction Teal'c maintained with finer resolution than most. O'Neill sat at the end of the table and said very little, which was how he processed the things that mattered most. The Hatak that responded, Hammond said. You said it was an advanced scout. What is Anubis looking for in that sector? The same thing I am, Kang said. He simply doesn't know it yet. His search is intuitive. He detected ancient energy patterns in that region 6 weeks ago and has been conducting passive surveillance since. He hasn't triangulated the outpost's location. He paused. He will. My timeline mapping suggests he identifies the coordinates within 4 months. And you can get us there sooner, Carter said. I can get you there within the week. Hammond's fingers were flat on the table, which was his version of careful deliberation made physical. What exactly are we going to find in this outpost, Kang? Not the broad strokes you gave us in the briefing room. Specifics. Kang looked at him steadily. An ancient repository of a type distinct from any your program has previously encountered. Not a knowledge repository designed for download into a human host. Those you are familiar with and the physiological consequences are documented. This one is different. It was built during the Ancients' final period before their mass ascension, when they were actively studying the mechanics of the ascension process itself, attempting to understand scientifically what ascension actually is. He let that settle before continuing. They were trying to map the transition, the neurological, energetic, and dimensional components of moving from a physical existence to an ascended one. They built a device that could store that map. Daniel had gone very still. A blueprint for ascension. A partial one. Incomplete. The ancients who built it ascended before they could finish it, which is either ironic or inevitable, depending on your perspective. The corner of Kang's mouth moved. But partial is sufficient for someone with the right foundation to work from. Someone who has spent 3 centuries studying every piece of ancient technology across a dozen timelines. Someone who has already done most of the theoretical work and needs only the empirical framework the device contains. The room was quiet enough that the ventilation system was audible. You want to ascend, Daniel said. I want to transcend, Kang corrected, it with a precision that suggested the distinction mattered enormously to him. Ascension, as the ancients practiced it, involves surrender, the release of individual identity into a collective energy state, the adoption of a non-interference principle that renders the ascended being essentially inert as an agent of change. That is not what I want. He leaned forward slightly, and for the first time in 2 days of controlled, calibrated interactions, something genuine moved behind his eyes. Not warmth exactly, but the heat of a real conviction held for a very long time. I want what comes after ascension. The ancients stopped at the threshold because their philosophy demanded they stop. I have no such limitation. O'Neill looked at him for a long moment. So you want to become something even the ascended ancients decided not to be? He said. Yes, and you're telling us this because you would have determined it eventually, and I prefer you determine it now, when there is still time for you to decide whether the intelligence I provide about Anubis is worth the risk of helping me reach that outpost. Kang sat back, the brief window of genuine feeling closing with the quiet efficiency of a man re-establishing operational parameters. I am not asking you to help me transcend. I am asking you to help me get to the outpost before Anubis does. What I do once we are there is my business. What you do with the ancient technology we find there is yours. Hammond looked at O'Neill. O'Neill looked at the table. Carter, he said finally, is this technically possible? What he's describing? Carter exhaled. Sir, 24 hours ago I would have said no. Now I'm not sure what I'd say. She looked at Kang. I'd need to see the outpost. Kang nodded once. Then we agree on the next step, at minimum. Outside Cheyenne Mountain, autumn was beginning in Colorado Springs, the aspens going gold in the foothills with the seasonal indifference of a planet that had no idea what was being decided in the mountain above it. And somewhere in a sector of space that the SGC's gate network had not yet cataloged, an ancient outpost that had been silent for 10,000 years waited with the patience of something that had been built to last until it was needed. In the dark between stars, a Hatak bearing Anubis's mark adjusted its heading. The Tok'ra tunnel system beneath the surface of P3X984 smelled of crystalline minerals and carefully maintained secrets, which made it a natural habitat for Jacob Carter, who had been keeping the SGC's most sensitive intelligence relationships alive through sheer force of diplomatic stubbornness for 3 years. The tunnels grew themselves in the particular blue-violet hue of Tok'ra crystal technology, smooth and bioluminescent, and the effect was simultaneously beautiful and deeply alien in the way that most things Tok'ra were. Familiar enough to engage with, strange enough to never let you forget you were somewhere that human architecture had never touched. Jacob was waiting at the junction with the expression of a man whose symbiote had been feeding him intelligence updates for 6 hours straight and hadn't liked any of them. Selmek's been running your visitor's description through every Tok'ra historical record we have, he said, foregoing the greeting that the situation didn't have room for. We found 3 references, all of them from future-sourced intelligence. Temporal anomaly reports that the High Council classified and buried because the implications gave them headaches. He looked at Kang with the particular assessment of a former Air Force general who had subsequently spent years as a Tok'ra host and had consequently developed a very high threshold for things that should be impossible. You've been here before. In divergent branches, Kang said, never in this precise timeline configuration. The variables have been different each time. Selmek wants to speak with you directly, Jacob said. If you're willing. Kang inclined his head. Jacob's eyes shifted in the way that indicated the symbiote was taking primary consciousness. The pupils dilating slightly, the posture adjusting, the voice that emerged carrying the layered harmonic quality of a Tok'ra, speaking without the filter of their host's vocal patterns. I am Selmek, the voice said. I have lived for over 2,000 years and have encountered 17 temporal anomalies in that time. You are the first I have met who arrived with intention rather than accident. The ancient eyes studied Kang with a depth of assessment that made even the Conqueror hold very still. In 2 of the 3 historical records we found, your presence in a timeline preceded significant destabilization. In the 3rd, a Goa'uld threat was neutralized that would otherwise have cost 6 million lives. A pause. County, which outcome are we navigating toward? The 3rd, Kang said, with the understanding that my presence here is not altruistic. I have an objective that intersects with Earth's defense at certain points and diverges from it at others. I am being transparent about this because deception with a 2,000-year-old intelligence operative is inefficient. Selmek was quiet for a moment. Then Jacob reasserted, blinking once. She says she appreciates the honesty. She also says you should know that if your objectives endanger Earth or the Tok'ra Alliance, she will personally ensure that every system lord in the network receives your energy signature profile. A reasonable deterrent, Kang said. O'Neill looked between them. Are we done with the mutual respect portion? Because I was told there was intelligence. Jacob pulled a crystal data module from his jacket and interfaced it with the tunnel wall, projecting a star map in the blue-white light of Tok'ra holographic technology. The map resolved into a sector that Carter recognized immediately. It overlapped with the coordinates Kang had provided for the ancient outpost, and seeing them confirmed in Tok'ra intelligence records produced a feeling she identified as the specific unease of realizing that something you'd half hoped was wrong was actually right. Anubis has redirected 3 scout vessels to this sector in the last 2 weeks, Jacob said, tracing the patrol routes with his finger. No explanation in the Goa'uld communication intercepts we've managed to pull. He's not telling the other system lords what he's looking for, which means he considers it significant enough to protect as a unilateral advantage. He looked at Kang. Your outpost? He has detected the energy bleed from the repository's passive systems, Kang confirmed. Ancient technology at that age doesn't go fully dormant. There's a residual emission that's essentially undetectable unless you know what you're looking for. Anubis, given his partial ascension and the ancient knowledge he carries, knows what he's looking for. How long until he pinpoints it? Carter asked. In the original timeline, 4 months. My arrival has likely accelerated that. Kang's jaw tightened slightly, the first physical tell of genuine concern Carter had observed from him. When Anubis's call warriors detected my energy signature on P4X772, they transmitted data back to the Hatak before we disengaged. And he now knows something with advanced ancient compatible energy is operating in this region. He will refine his search parameters accordingly. Weeks then, Daniel said, not months, possibly less. O'Neill looked at Hammond's face on the MALP relayed communication screen they'd established for the briefing. The general had remained at the SGC because someone with his clearance level needed to be in the mountain when intelligence of this magnitude was being processed. Hammond's expression had the quality it got when he was calculating how many regulations he was about to authorize the violation of. General, O'Neill said, we need to move on the outpost soon. I'm aware, Colonel. Hammond's voice carried the careful weight of a man who had been thinking about something difficult for several hours. When I'm also aware that we're potentially facilitating a man's attempt to become something beyond ascended in order to beat a half-ascended Goa'uld to ancient technology. I want it on the record that I find this situation concerning. Noted, sir, Carter said. It's on the record, O'Neill confirmed. Very concerning. Also our best option. Daniel had been standing at the edge of the holographic map, running his finger along the sector boundary with the distracted focus of someone cross-referencing something internal. Kang, he said, not looking up. The outpost. You said the ancients were mapping the ascension process, the neurological and energetic components. He turned. You also said the device was incomplete because the ancients ascended before they could finish it. He paused. Haiti, how incomplete? The empirical framework covers approximately 70% of the transition mechanics, Kang said. The remaining 30% concerns the dimensional interface, what the ancients described in their records as the moment of crossing, the point at which physical existence releases entirely. And you're planning to work with a 70% map, Daniel said. I have spent 3 centuries building the other 30% from secondary sources, Kang said. Fragments in ancient databases across 14 worlds. Mathematical models derived from ascended behavior patterns I have observed and cataloged. The device provides the empirical foundation. My research provides the remainder. Daniel looked at him with an expression that O'Neill had learned to read as the archaeologist's version of deep alarm dressed in intellectual clothing. And if your 30% is wrong? The tunnel was very quiet. Then the attempt fails, Kang said, and I remain what I am. Or? Daniel pressed. Kang met his gaze. Or it fails in a way that is more final than that? Yes. He said it without evasion, without the deflection of a man uncomfortable with the answer. I am aware of the risk. I have been aware of it for 3 centuries. It has not changed my intention. Carter thought about that. About a man who had conquered 47 timelines, who wore the accumulated strategic knowledge of 900 years of human history like armor, who had walked through an iris that nothing was supposed to walk through, choosing to stake everything on a 70% map toward a destination the ancients themselves had approached with caution. She thought about what drove a conqueror to want something beyond conquest and found the edges of the answer more human than she'd expected. Teal'c had been listening to all of it from his position near the tunnel entrance, and now he spoke with the quiet deliberateness that meant he had finished processing and arrived at a conclusion. In my years of service to Apophis, I witnessed many who sought the power of the ancients. Goa'uld who believed their false divinity entitled them to true divinity. His eyes moved to Kang. You are not the same as them. You do not claim entitlement. You claim preparation. He paused. Chun, I am not certain that distinction is sufficient, but it is notable. Kang looked at him for a moment. From Teal'c of Chulak, I will accept that as high praise. Jacob was studying the star map, fingers tracing the patrol routes again, with the systematic attention of someone building a tactical picture. You'll need a window in Anubis's surveillance pattern to reach the outpost undetected, he said. Selmak and I can coordinate with our operative near his fleet. Bayou may be 36 hours of clear approach. That's enough, Carter said, already calculating gate addresses and approach vectors in the part of her mind that never fully stopped working. O'Neill looked around the bioluminescent tunnel, at his team, at the Tok'ra star map, when at the 30th century conqueror who wanted to become something the ascended ancients had been too philosophically restrained to attempt, and made the decision with the quiet efficiency of a man who had learned that the most consequential choices rarely felt as large as they were in the moment of making them. 36 hours, he said. We move at 0600. The planet had no designation in the SGC database because the gate address Kang provided didn't exist in any catalog Earth's program had compiled, which meant the MALP they sent through 20 minutes before insertion returned footage of a world that looked back at them with the particular indifference of somewhere that had been waiting a very long time for someone to remember it existed. The surface was high plateau geology, flat gray stone stretching to a horizon broken by the angular ruins of structures that predated the Goa'uld occupation of the galaxy by several million years. The atmosphere was thin but breathable. Temperature was 4 degrees Celsius. Wind was negligible. The MALP's radiation sensors returned readings that made Carter go very still at her console and then write 3 lines of notation before she said anything. There's an energy emission from approximately 2 kilometers northeast of the gate, she told Hammond, who was in the control room watching the MALP feed with the focus of a man who had authorized something significant and was monitoring it accordingly. It's ancient, very old, very stable, and it's been running continuously for at least 10,000 years on a power source I can't identify from here. Whatever is in that outpost, sir, it never turned off. Meaning it was built to be found, Daniel said, pulling on his jacket in the gate room below. Or built to be ready, Kang said, checking his armor systems with the pre-mission focus Carter had observed was his version of the gear checks the rest of them ran. The ancients who constructed this facility were meticulous. They would not have left it active without purpose. Hammond looked at O'Neill through the control room glass. The look said several things simultaneously, all of them variations on be careful and come back. Ona delivered in the compressed visual language of a commanding officer who had sent this team through the gate enough times to have stopped pretending the worry ever went away. O'Neill gave him the small nod that meant understood and acknowledged and we'll do our best, which was the honest version of the assurances that neither of them had ever been comfortable pretending were guarantees. The gate room received them all one last time before the wormhole took them, and then the event horizon swallowed the team whole. The plateau on the other side was as silent as the MALP footage had suggested, and somehow more so in person, the particular quality of silence that belongs to places where nothing has moved for a very long time. The ruins extended in every direction with the monumental patience of ancient architecture, which had been built to outlast not just civilizations, but the geological processes that erased them. Carter's scanner was active before she'd taken 10 steps, mapping energy readings, and the 2-kilometer walk to the outpost entrance was conducted with the careful attention of professionals who had learned that ancient sites had a habit of responding to visitors in ways the visitors hadn't anticipated. Kang walked slightly ahead, not racing but purposeful, and Carter noticed that his armor's sensors were running at a higher sensitivity than she'd seen before. The subtle luminescence at the joints cycling with an increased frequency that she'd come to read as the suit working hard. "You've been here before," she said, "in other timelines." "Once," he said, "in a branch where the outpost was already damaged when we arrived. Anubis had reached it first, extracted what he could, and destroyed the rest." He paused. "In that timeline, the war lasted another 9 years." Carter absorbed that. "What happened to that version of SG-1? A beat of silence. "They were remarkable," he said, with a flatness that was its own kind of answer. The outpost entrance was a recessed archway in the plateau face, not built into a hillside but set directly into the stone as if the structure below had grown upward into the rock rather than being constructed against it. The material around the arch was the distinctive pale gray of ancient construction, marked with the flowing script of the Alteran language that Daniel was already photographing with the focused energy of a man trying to absorb 3 pages of text simultaneously. "Entry protocols," Daniel said, are moving his light across the inscription. "Standard ancient phrasing. This place was constructed for those who seek understanding of the Great Transition. There's a lineage identifier here. It's asking for..." He stopped. "It's asking for a specific genetic marker." "The ATA gene," Carter said, pulling her scanner up. "Shepard's got the strongest natural expression we found, but O'Neill's red should be sufficient to..." The archway activated, not in response to O'Neill, not in response to Carter, who carried the gene therapy variant. The script around the arch illuminated in a sequence that ran from the outer edge inward, blue-white light chasing itself toward the center, and every member of SG-1 turned to look at Kang, who had stopped walking and was standing very still with an expression that was, for the first time since his arrival, something close to unguarded. "That's not possible," Carter said, scanner in hand, readings confirming what the visual was already telling her. "The ATA gene is found in less than 3% of the current human population. In 900 years, genetic drift would have concentrated it," Kang said quietly, "in certain lineages, over sufficient generations, in populations that repeatedly interfaced with ancient technology. The gene expression strengthened rather than diluted." He looked at the illuminated archway with an expression Carter could only describe as recognition. Not surprise, but the arrival at something long expected. "I did not know, when I began this search, that the repository would respond to me directly. I believed I would need a host-compatible subject to interface with the device." He paused. "Yes, this changes the operational parameters." "How?" O'Neill asked. "It means the device isn't going to give me information about the ascension process," Kang said. "It's going to try to initiate it." The silence on the plateau was absolute. Daniel looked at the archway, at the still-running sequence of illumination that was waiting with ancient patience for the person it had recognized to step through. "The ancients built this for someone specific," he said slowly. "Someone with a strong enough ATA expression that the repository could interact with directly. They didn't build it as a research archive." He turned to Kang. "They built it as a door." "Yes," Kang said. "And they expected whoever walked through it to be ready," Daniel continued, working through it in real time the way he always did. A language and archaeology and history assembling themselves into implications. "The inscription doesn't say this place was built for those who seek understanding. It says," he looked back at his photographs, correcting himself with the precision of a man who took translation seriously. "It says this place was built for those who have already understood. Past tense. Completion implied." Kang looked at him. "Your ancient has improved since the timeline where you were still working from the Abydos cartouche." "I've had good teachers," Daniel said, and there was something complicated in both their expressions. The mutual recognition of people who had been in rooms together before, across distances that weren't measured in miles. O'Neill stepped up beside Kang and looked at the archway. The light was still running its inward sequence, patient and expectant, illuminating script that was 10,000 years old and apparently very sure about what it wanted. "So," O'Neill said, "ancient door, designed specifically for you, wants to start a process you've been working toward for 300 years. He looked sideways at Kang. "You walked in here with 70% of the map. Is that enough?" Kang was quiet for a moment, a real moment, not the calculated pauses he deployed in briefing rooms. "In the timeline where the outpost was already damaged, I spent 40 years after that failure reconstructing what I had lost access to. I believe the reconstruction was accurate." He looked at the archway. "I believe it because I had to." Teal'c, who had been scanning the plateau perimeter with steady attention throughout the conversation, he spoke without turning from his surveillance. "O'Neill, I am reading approach vectors. 3 from the northeast quadrant, moving at speed consistent with Cold Warrior deployment." O'Neill's P90 came up. Carter's scanner shifted to threat assessment mode. Daniel stepped back from the archway entrance with the practiced movement of someone who had learned to clear the tactical space quickly. Kang turned from the archway and looked northeast, where the plateau stone was still empty, but the horizon had the quality it gets when something significant is closing on it. "He found it faster than I projected," Kang said, not alarmed, recalculating. The energy signature of the archway activation accelerated his triangulation. He was closer than my timeline data suggested. He turned back to O'Neill. "We have perhaps 12 minutes before the advance force arrives in sufficient numbers to become a serious problem. Then we need to be inside in 11, O'Neill said. Kang nodded once, turned to the archway and stepped through. The light followed him in, the script extinguishing from outside to inside as he crossed the threshold, as if the door were closing behind him in sequence, not trapping him, but marking the passage as complete. Carter was through next, scanner running hot, and the interior of the outpost opened around them in the breathtaking way that ancient architecture always did. vast and luminous, designed by minds that understood space differently, every surface functional and every function elegant. And in the chamber's center, rising from the floor in a configuration that no ancient repository Carter had ever seen bore any resemblance to, was the device. It was already awake. The device was not what any of them had expected, which was itself informative, because Carter had expected something remarkable and still found herself stopped 3 steps inside the chamber, with her scanner forgotten at her side, simply looking. It was tall, 4 meters, perhaps 5, and it didn't have the crystalline angularity of most ancient construction. It was organic in its geometry, a central column of material that wasn't quite metal and wasn't quite stone, surrounded by 7 concentric rings that rotated at different speeds and different angles, each one etched with script that moved as the rings moved, the characters flowing and reforming in a continuous reconfiguration that Daniel was already reaching for his notebook to try to capture. And the light it emitted wasn't the blue-white of standard ancient technology. It was warmer, deeper, a gold that sat at the edge of white and suggested heat without producing it. And the air in the chamber had a quality that Carter's instruments couldn't quantify, but that her hindbrain registered as significant in the particular way that preceded important decisions. Kang stood before it and was, for the first time since his arrival, completely still. Not the controlled stillness of a tactician managing his presentation. Not the deliberate calm of a conqueror who had learned to weaponize composure. Something underneath all of that. A man who had spent 3 centuries building toward a single point and had just arrived at it, and was discovering that arrival felt nothing like he had anticipated. The rings, Daniel said quietly, moving carefully around the device's perimeter, his light tracing the flowing script. They're not decorative. Each ring is a separate layer of the same document. They're meant to be read simultaneously. The ancients occasionally used overlapping text structures for concepts that couldn't be expressed linearly. He paused, tilting his head, reading while the rings moved. It's a record of the process. First person. Someone documented their own ascension, in real time. Who? Carter asked. The script doesn't use names. It uses designations, mathematical ones. Daniel moved to the next ring, following its rotation. But the voice is consistent. It's one person, and they were afraid. He looked up. The ancients don't usually record fear. Their texts are almost uniformly composed, even when describing catastrophic events. This person was genuinely afraid, and they left the fear in the record. Kang spoke without turning from the device, because they wanted whoever came after to know it was survivable. Fear is data. They left the data. Daniel looked at him. You've read this before, in other timelines. Fragments, never the complete text. Kang's voice had changed. Still controlled, but carrying something underneath it that Carter had not heard from him before. Something that sounded like it might have been the 30th century's version of awe. In the timeline where the outpost was damaged, the outer 2 rings were destroyed. I spent 20 years working from what remained. He paused. The outer 2 rings are the ones that document the dimensional interface. Fumona, the crossing point. Carter pulled her scanner back to active and moved toward the device's base, where energy conduits ran into the floor in patterns that suggested the device drew power not from a ZPM or Naquata source, but from something ambient, something the plateau itself was generating, or had been generated by, or perhaps was the surface expression of. The power source, she said, running her scanner in slow arcs. It's not a reactor. It's not any stored energy system I can identify. She checked the readings twice. It's drawing from the wormhole network. Everyone looked at her. Not actively, she said quickly, working through it out loud. Not dialing anything, but the Stargates, the gate network. It operates on a power infrastructure that's distributed across the entire galaxy. The gates themselves are nodes, but the underlying energy matrix that makes the network function is everywhere. This device it's tapping into that, passively, like drawing current from a field rather than a source. She looked up at the device with the expression she got when something was so far beyond current understanding that it recontextualized several things she'd previously considered settled. The ancients built the gate network, and they built this device, and they connected them. The outpost isn't powered by the network, it's sustained by it. As long as the gate network exists, this device runs. Which means, O'Neill said, that Anubis couldn't shut it down even if he wanted to. He could destroy it, Carter said. But he couldn't turn it off. Teal'c's voice came through the radio from his position at the outpost entrance, where he had remained as perimeter watch. O'Neill, the advance force has reached the plateau. 12 Kull warriors. They are moving toward the outpost entrance at tactical pace. A pause. There is also a Teltac in low orbit. Someone is watching. Anubis himself? O'Neill asked. Unknown. The vessel is running dampening fields. I cannot determine occupancy. O'Neill looked at Carter, who was still processing the power source readings, and then at Kang, who had turned from the device to face the room with the expression of a man recalculating against a compressed timeline. How long does the process take? O'Neill asked him. If you interface with it now, worst case. I don't know, Kang said. In no timeline where I have studied this device has anyone actually completed the interface. The record suggests the original subject required time. The text doesn't quantify it. Best case? Also unknown. O'Neill absorbed this. So we're defending an unknown position for an unknown duration against 12 Kull warriors and possibly Anubis himself while you attempt something that has a roughly 30% chance of killing you. The 30% concerns the dimensional interface specifically, Kang said. The first 70% of the process carries different risks. What risks? Kang looked at the device. The process is not passive. The device interfaces with the subject's consciousness directly, reads the neurological architecture, maps the energy signature, begins the transition preparation. It is intensive. I will not be tactically available while it is occurring. You'll be helpless, Daniel translated. Vulnerable, Kang corrected, with the precision of a man for whom the distinction mattered. There is a difference. O'Neill made the calculation with the speed of someone who had been making impossible calculations in bad situations for long enough that the process had become efficient. 12 Kull warriors at the entrance, a Teltac in orbit, an outpost that couldn't be turned off but could be destroyed. A man about to be genuinely vulnerable for the first time in 3 centuries in a chamber they needed to hold. Carter, he said, the outpost defenses, ancient facility this size, this significant, there have to be some. Carter was already at the wall interfaces. Running her hands across the control surfaces with the ATA gene doing its quiet work in her blood. Working on it, sir. Teal'c, fall back to interior position. Do not engage outside. Let them come to us. Understood, Teal'c said, and his footsteps were already moving. Daniel was still at the device, reading the outermost ring with focused urgency. Kang, the fear the original subject documented. What specifically were they afraid of? Kang turned to face the device again. Losing the self, he said quietly. The transition requires the release of identity architecture, the neurological patterns that constitute individual consciousness. The fear was that what came through on the other side might be continuous with the subject in terms of energy and memory, but not in terms of the thing that made them who they were. He paused. The fear was that it was a kind of death dressed as transcendence. And you're not afraid of that, Daniel said, and it wasn't quite a question. Kang was quiet for a long moment. The device's rings turned. The gold light moved across his face, and in it, something that had been armored for 3 centuries showed its actual shape for just a moment. Not the absence of fear, but something that had looked at fear for so long that it had made a kind of peace with it. I have conquered 47 timelines, he said. In each one I was the same intellect, the same drives, the same fundamental architecture. I have never changed. He placed his hand on the device's central column, and the rings responded immediately, their rotation shifting, the script reconfiguring. Perhaps that is what I am actually afraid of, that without this, Sword, I never will. The device's gold light intensified, the rings accelerated, and in the outpost entrance, the sound of Kull warriors moving through ancient corridors began its heavy, rhythmic approach. The first Kull warrior through the interior corridor took Teal'c's staff weapon blast at close range and kept moving, which was the thing about Kull warriors that never stopped being a problem. The staff weapon was the most powerful personal weapon in the Goa'uld arsenal, and against Anubis's super soldiers, it was a strongly worded suggestion. Teal'c had adapted. He fired twice in rapid sequence at the joint between helmet and chest armor, the gap that Kang had identified on P4X772, and the warrior went down with the mechanical finality of something whose structural integrity had been specifically compromised. "Yeah, see, that works," O'Neill confirmed, from the secondary position he'd established behind an ancient console that was solid enough to matter. His P-90 was up and tracking the corridor entrance as two more warriors pushed through. The P-90's ammunition was not designed for hull armor, and O'Neill knew it, but he'd learned that sustained fire at the visor created enough thermal stress to degrade the warrior's targeting systems, which bought seconds, and seconds in a firefight were the currency that kept people alive. Carter had found the outpost defensive systems. They were not what she'd hoped for, not drone weapons, not the kind of ancient military technology that Atlantis carried, but the outpost had been built with the practical awareness that 10,000 years was a long time to sit undefended. Often, the ancients who designed it had incorporated what Carter was now identifying as a spatial disruption field, a technology that interfered with the ring transporter system Cull warriors used for rapid redeployment. Active, it meant the warriors couldn't teleport within the outpost perimeter. They had to move on foot through corridors, which equalized the tactical situation from completely untenable to merely very bad. "Field is active," she called, fingers leaving the wall interface and going to her weapon. "They can't ring in directly. Choke point defense is viable." "How many choke points?" O'Neill asked. "Two. The main corridor and a secondary access on the north face. Teal'c has the main. North face needs coverage." Daniel Jackson was, at that precise moment, doing two things simultaneously that required his full attention, and therefore guaranteed he was giving neither of them enough. He was reading the device's script as fast as the rotating rings would allow, while keeping his Beretta on the north access corridor with the watchful attention of a man who had been on enough gate missions to have developed genuine competence with a sidearm, which was not where his natural aptitudes lay, but which life had insisted upon anyway. "I see it," he said, and his voice had the particular quality it got when he was doing active translation. Slightly distant, processing on a channel that ran parallel to immediate reality. "Kang, the outer ring, there's a preparation sequence. The original subject went through it before the main interface. It's not optional. The device won't initiate the primary process without it." Kang was standing with both hands on the central column, the device's gold light running up his arms in patterns that followed the lines of his armor's circuitry, as if the ancient technology were reading him through the suit, mapping the architecture it found there with the patient precision of a system that had been designed to do exactly this and had been waiting 10 millennia for the opportunity. His eyes were open. He was present and responsive, but the quality of his attention had shifted, some portion of it directed inward, toward whatever the device was doing at the junction between its processes and his. "I know," he said. "It is already occurring." "What does it feel like?" Daniel asked, unable to help it. A pause. "Like being read," Kang said. "Every memory, on every timeline, every choice. It is not gentle." Another pause. Longer. "It is thorough." Outside, the sound of the firefight at the main corridor was the controlled percussion of Teal'c working at his absolute professional best. Staff weapon firing in the precise rhythm of someone who had calculated exactly how many shots were required and was delivering them with the economy of a master. One warrior down, another. The third taking longer because it had learned from watching the first two fall and had adjusted its approach angle, which Teal'c adapted to with the quiet competence of a Jaffa warrior who had been doing this since before O'Neill had graduated from officer training. O'Neill was managing the main corridor backup and monitoring the room simultaneously, which was the particular multitasking that combat command required and that he had never enjoyed in any of the ways people sometimes romanticized it. He looked at Kang, at the gold light climbing higher, at the rings rotating faster, at the script flowing in continuous reconfiguration, and made the assessment that the process was accelerating, which meant the window between now and the point of no return was closing. "Carter," he said low, "worst case scenario. Device is mid-process. Anubis gets in here. What happens?" Carter was covering the north access with Daniel and running the math at the same time. "If Anubis interrupts the process mid-transition, the dimensional interface partially engaged and then collapsed." She paused, working through the physics of something that had no established physics. when it would be like a wormhole losing power mid-transit. The energy involved would release catastrophically. This outpost would cease to exist. And Kang? Unknown. Possibly the same. Possibly somewhere between states. The transition record documents the fear of that outcome specifically. She glanced at the device. The original subject called it dissolution. O'Neill filed that under things he was going to think about later, when later existed. The North Access Corridor produced movement. Not a cull warrior, which Carter had braced for, but a prior, which was wrong in a way that took her a half-second to process, because priors belonged to a threat that wasn't supposed to exist yet in this timeline. The Ori Crusade still years away, and then she recalibrated because the figure in the corridor wasn't a prior. Not exactly. It was a human form wearing Anubis's energy signature like a garment, the half-ascended Goa'uld projecting through a host body in the particular way he sometimes did when he wanted to be present without being physically present. A holographic adjacent manifestation that the SGC had encountered twice before and that Carter had never been able to fully explain. The form was tall and hooded, and where a face should have been, there was light. Cold, blue-white, the inverse of the device's gold. And when it spoke, the voice came from everywhere in the chamber at once. "Remarkable," Anubis said. The voice carried the layered resonance of a Goa'uld and something else beneath it, the something else being what partial ascension sounded like when it decided to speak. The ancients built a door, and a future human walked through it. I have been searching for this outpost for 6 weeks. The manifestation moved toward the device with the gliding non-locomotion of energy given temporary form. I will not be searching any longer. O'Neill stepped between the manifestation and the device. Yeah, that's going to be a no from us. The manifestation regarded him with the particular quality of attention that beings of significant power give to obstacles they find interesting rather than threatening. Colonel O'Neill, your program's resilience has been a persistent source of irritation and occasional respect. But you are holding a projectile weapon in the presence of a being who has accessed ancient knowledge beyond your comprehension. The geometry of this situation does not favor you. The geometry of most situations doesn't favor me, O'Neill said. Sorry, I find it clarifying. Teal'c had fallen back from the main corridor. The Cull warriors were holding position, not advancing, which meant Anubis had called them off, which meant Anubis wanted to see what happened next before deciding whether to destroy the outpost or take what he could from it. Carter registered this tactical shift and understood what it meant. Anubis was curious. He had detected Kang's energy signature, tracked it here, and now he was looking at a device that was actively interfacing with a human subject and displaying processes that his partial ancient knowledge recognized but had never seen in operation. Anubis was, above everything else, a being who needed to understand what he was dealing with before he destroyed it. That was their margin. Kang, Carter said, keeping her voice level, keeping her weapon on the manifestation. Whatever stage you're at, we need you to know that we have approximately as long as Anubis's curiosity holds. Kang's response was not verbal. The device's rings, which had been accelerating in their rotation, suddenly shifted. Not faster, but differently. The 7 rings reorganizing their relative angles in a configuration that Carter's scanner registered as a fundamental change in the device's operational mode. The gold light that had been climbing Kang's arms reached his helmet, and his faceplate, which had been closed throughout, slid open automatically. Not mechanically, but as if whatever was happening inside the device had decided the armor's interface with his face needed to be direct. His eyes were gold, not reflectively, not catching the light, generating it. The same frequency as the device, the same depth of warmth, and the ring's script was moving across his irises in the flowing Alteran characters, which was physiologically impossible in every framework Carter possessed, and which her scanner was nevertheless confirming with the stolid democratic impartiality of instruments that reported what they found regardless of whether it made sense. Anubis's manifestation had gone very still. Interesting, the ancient voice said, and for the first time it carried something that was not quite certainty. The device is not giving him knowledge. A pause, the cold light of the manifestation flickering slightly. It is giving him something else entirely. What? Daniel asked, unable to help himself even now. Anubis looked at him with the expression of a being who had accessed more ancient knowledge than any living Goa'uld, and still found the answer to this question surprising. Permission, Anubis said. The word landed in the chamber like a stone dropped into still water, and the ripples it made were felt differently by everyone present. Daniel felt them as comprehension, the translation clicking into place, the altar and text on the rings suddenly readable in a new register, the device's purpose reframing itself around that single word in a way that changed everything he thought he'd understood about what the ancients had built here. Carter felt them as physics. Something was happening to the energy output of the device that her scanner was struggling to categorize, and the readings climbing past the scale she'd calibrated for and requiring real-time adjustment in a way that meant the process was entering territory that had no established precedent. Teal'c felt them as tactical weight. The cool warriors in the corridor had not advanced, but they had not retreated, and the Tel'tak in orbit was still holding position, and the calculus of this room was shifting in ways that his warrior's instincts registered as the moment before everything changed irrevocably. O'Neill felt them as the particular sensation he associated with decisions that couldn't be unmade. Anubis's manifestation had moved closer to the device, not to Kang, not to the team, but to the device itself, with the focused attention of a half-ascended being encountering something that exceeded his existing framework. The cold light of the manifestation brightened slightly, the way a searchlight brightens when it finds what it was looking for. And Carter saw in the scanner readings that the manifestation was attempting something, reaching toward the device's energy field with the ancient-derived abilities that Anubis had spent years cultivating from his partial ascension. The device rejected him, not violently, not with weapons or barriers. The gold light simply did not respond to the cold light's touch, the way certain frequencies of radiation pass through matter without interaction, not blocked, simply irrelevant to each other. Anubis pressed the attempt. Awen and the device continued its process with the serene indifference of a system that had been built for a specific subject and had found that subject and had no operational context for anything else. The manifestation's stillness became something harder. "It was keyed," Anubis said, and the layered voice carried genuine frustration now. The composure of a being accustomed to accessing ancient technology through knowledge and will, encountering for the first time a lock that knowledge and will could not turn. The ancients keyed this device to a specific genetic lineage, one that does not exist in this era. The cold light turned to Kang, reassessing. "You are from the future of this planet." "Yes," Kang said. His voice had changed, still recognizably his. It's still carrying the precise modulation of a man who had spent centuries calibrating every word. But underneath it, now something resonant that hadn't been there before. A harmonic that the chamber's acoustics picked up and returned from multiple angles. The gold in his eyes was stable, deep, the ring script still moving through his irises in continuous reformation. He was present, fully, clearly present. But the quality of his presence had changed in a way that Carter's instruments confirmed and her instincts registered before her instruments did. He was in the process, actively, irreversibly. The first 70% of the map engaged and running. Then the lineage was seeded, Anubis said, working through it with the relentless analytical momentum of a Goa'uld intelligence that had never learned to stop. As the ancients knew this device would require a future subject, they ensured the genetic architecture would exist when it was needed. The cold light flickered with something that, in a less ancient and terrible being, might have been called admiration. A 10,000-year plan. Even I did not credit them with that patience. They were building a door, Daniel said from his position near the north access, weapons still up, unable to stop himself from engaging with the archaeology of what was happening even in the middle of a firefight's pause. They couldn't walk through it themselves. Their philosophy wouldn't allow them to attempt what Kang is attempting. But they wanted someone to. Eventually, someone who had done the work, carried the lineage, come far enough. He looked at Kang. Or they built it for whoever you are. Anubis's manifestation moved, and the movement was not toward the device this time. It was toward Kang. O'Neill was already between them, P90 raised, which was a gesture that both he and Anubis understood was tactically insufficient, and which O'Neill made anyway, because the geometry of the situation demanded it, and because Jack O'Neill had never once in his career allowed the insufficiency of a gesture to stop him from making it when it was the right one. "Don't," O'Neill said. "Your weapon cannot affect me in this form, Colonel," Anubis said. "I know. I'm talking to you anyway. Don't." The manifestation paused, Not because O'Neill's weapon threatened it, because, and Carter watched this with the focused attention she gave to phenomena she was trying to understand in real time, because Anubis was calculating. He couldn't access the device. He couldn't take what it contained. But Kang, mid-process, partially transitioned, carrying the device's output in his own neurological architecture. Kang was a vessel, and vessels could be taken. He's going to try to interrupt the process, Carter said sharply. Force a partial transition and extract what Kang's carrying. If the dimensional interface is half engaged, dissolution, Daniel said. For both of them, Carter said. The energy release would destroy the outpost, O'Neill finished. He looked at Anubis's manifestation with the expression he reserved for enemies he had assessed completely and found wanting in the particular way that made him dangerous. So you'd blow yourself up to stop him. This manifestation is not my physical form, Anubis said. I would survive. He would not. The device would be destroyed. The cold light regarded Kang with the dispassion of a being doing a cost-benefit analysis on another sentient's existence. It is a reasonable outcome. I cannot have what this device contains, but I can ensure no one else does either. Teal'c fired. Not at the manifestation. He had spent enough time near Anubis across years of intelligence and conflict to understand that energy weapons pass through the projection without effect. He fired at the device's base. So specifically at the conduit junction Carter had identified as the connection between the outpost's spatial disruption field and its power supply, and the blast was precisely calibrated to do one thing: reroute the field's output. Carter understood what he was doing half a second after he did it, and her hands were on the wall interface before the blast had finished echoing, redirecting the spatial disruption field from defensive perimeter mode to focused projection, concentrating the field's interference effect into a directed beam aimed at the point in the chamber where Anubis's manifestation was standing. The manifestation fragmented, not destroyed. The projection technology Anubis used was beyond the disruption field's ability to permanently sever, but interrupted, broken into component interference patterns. The cold light scattering across the chamber walls in disconnected shards that took 30 seconds to coalesce, and another 30 to begin the reconstruction that would eventually reform the projection. 2 minutes, maybe less. Enough. That was exceptionally well-reasoned, Kang said, and his voice now carried the full harmonic depth of someone whose consciousness was operating simultaneously on more than one level. The resonance, not performed but structural, a quality of the process itself expressing through his speech. Both of you. We have maybe 90 seconds before he's back, O'Neill said. Carter, the process. Where is it? Carter looked at her scanner, at the device, at Kang, and ran the assessment with every analytical tool she had. The first 70% is complete, she said. The device has finished the preparation sequence. The dimensional interface it's initiating, the crossing point. She looked at Kang directly. The part you were afraid of. The part the original subject was afraid of, Kang corrected quietly. Are you? A pause, the rings turned. The gold light in his eyes deepened. Yes, he said simply, and the honesty of it was the most human thing he had said in 6 days. Anubis's shattered manifestation was already beginning to reform in the corner of the chamber, the cold light pulling itself back together with the patient determination of a being that had survived everything it had ever encountered. The cold warriors in the corridor were moving again. Without Anubis's direct attention holding them in place, their standing orders had reasserted, and the sound of their approach was the heavy rhythmic percussion of the inevitable. O'Neill looked at Kang, at the man who had walked through an iris, who had known their names before they'd spoken them, who had fought beside them with the economy of someone who had done it before and valued it more than he showed, and made the decision with the clarity that came when all the variables reduced to one question. Can you finish it? He asked. Right now. Whatever the crossing requires. Can you do it? The rings were moving at their maximum speed now, the script a continuous blur of golden light, the chamber filled with the harmonic resonance of a 10,000-year-old device doing the thing it had been built across geological time to do. Kang's hands were still on the central column, and the contact point where his palms met the ancient material had become luminous, the boundary between his armor and the device indistinct, the two technologies in a conversation that had moved beyond Carter's ability to fully monitor. I did not come 300 years and 9 timelines to stop at the threshold, Kang said. And the device answered him. The gold light didn't intensify so much as it shifted, moved from a quality of illumination into a quality of presence, filling the chamber not with brightness, but with something that the human nervous system registered before the eyes did. A sense of depth opening in the air, the dimensional interface doing the thing that the ancients had documented and feared, and ultimately chosen not to attempt. The rings stopped rotating. In the sudden stillness, when Anubis's reforming manifestation flared with cold light and reached forward, and Teal'c fired, and Carter fired, and O'Neill fired, and none of it touched the manifestation, but all of it bought 2 seconds, and 2 seconds was what the device needed, and the crossing happened. It happened the way the original subject's record had described it. Not like dying, not like transformation, but like a door opening that had always been there and had simply required the right key held at the right angle in a hand that had earned the right to turn it. Kang's physical form was present, and then it was luminous, and then the luminosity was the form, and the form was something that the chamber's stone walls and Carter's scanner and every framework any of them had carried into this room could not fully contain or categorize. What remained was not nothing. What remained was not the same. Anubis's manifestation completed its reformation and found itself standing in a chamber where the calculus had changed in ways that even a half-ascended being with 10,000 years of ancient knowledge required a moment to process. The thing that had been Kang looked at Anubis across a distance that was not measured in meters. And Anubis, who had faced the SGC's finest in system lords and ascended ancients, and had never once shown fear, took a step backward. What followed was not a battle in any framework that O'Neill's considerable combat experience had prepared him for. And O'Neill had a considerable combat experience that included staff weapon firefights on pyramid ships, hand-to-hand combat with Jaffa warriors, Fauna in one memorable afternoon involving a replicator queen and a prototype disruptor that he still wasn't fully authorized to discuss. Battles had geometry, they had sightlines and firing positions, and the comprehensible physics of bodies and weapons, occupying space with hostile intent toward each other. What happened between Anubis and the thing that had been Kang occupied the chamber the way weather occupied a landscape. Not positioned, not directed, but present everywhere simultaneously, expressing itself through effects rather than actions. The cold light of Anubis's manifestation reached, and the gold light didn't block it so much as recontextualize it. The reaching simply became irrelevant. The cold light's intent dissolving not into resistance but into a larger framework where the intent itself had no purchase. One on Anubis pressed harder, drawing on the ancient knowledge that had made him the most dangerous system lord in the galaxy's history, and the gold light received it all with the patient completeness of something that had moved beyond the register where Anubis's power was meaningful. Carter watched her scanner with the focused intensity of someone trying to record a phenomenon she would spend years understanding. The readings didn't chart conflict. They charted displacement, one energy state making room for another with the fundamental indifference of physics reorganizing around a new constant. Anubis's manifestation spoke, and for the first time in the years the SGC had been tracking the half-ascended Goa'uld. The layered voice carried something that resolved, on careful listening, into the frequency of genuine fear. "What are you?" Anubis said. Not a demand. A question. The distinction was enormous. The gold light moved, and the movement contained something that Carter's instruments rendered as a resonance pattern, but that Daniel, standing with his notebook forgotten in his hand and his weapon at his side, understood as language. Not Alteran, not any language in his considerable catalog, but something that operated at the register where language and mathematics and music occupied the same space and meant the same thing. He couldn't translate it. He felt it, which was different and in some ways more complete. The cold light of Anubis's manifestation contracted, pulled inward, not destroyed. Whatever Kang had become was not operating in the framework where destruction was the relevant response, but reduced, compressed. The vast ancient derived power that Anubis had wielded for decades, drawing itself tight in the presence of something that made that power feel like candlelight, brought into a room that was already on fire with something larger and warmer and entirely indifferent to its importance. The manifestation vanished, not with drama, not with the explosive release of a being defeated in combat. It simply was present and then was not. the cold light withdrawing with the quiet efficiency of something that had assessed the situation and made the only calculation available to it. Whether Anubis himself, aboard the Teltac in orbit, had chosen withdrawal, or whether what had happened in the chamber had made the choice for him was a question Carter added to the list of things she would need weeks to work through. Only the Cull warriors in the corridor stopped moving. Without Anubis's direction, without the animating purpose that gave the super soldiers their operational coherence, they stood in the ancient corridor with the inert quality of very sophisticated equipment, awaiting instructions that were not coming. Teal'c moved through them carefully and they did not respond, and after 30 seconds of assessment, he returned to the chamber entrance and stood there with the stillness of a man bearing witness to something he would be thinking about for the rest of his life. In the chamber, the device's rings had stopped. The central column was dark, not damaged, not depleted, but completed. The way a door is closed after the person it was built for has passed through it. Half the power connections to the gate network that Carter had identified were still active, the ambient draw continuing, sustaining a device that had finished its primary function and was now simply waiting in the way that ancient technology waited. Indefinitely, patiently, for whatever came next. The Goa'uld light was in the room, not localized. Present throughout the chamber, the same warmth it had carried since the device first activated, but no longer emanating from a point. Distributed. Aware in a way that made the back of Carter's neck register something her scientific framework didn't have vocabulary for, and her hindbrain understood immediately. O'Neill stood in the center of the chamber and looked at the Goa'uld light the way he looked at most things that defied his categories. Directly, without pretense, and with the particular honesty of a man who had spent his career in contact with the incomprehensible and had never once pretended it was comprehensible just because pretending would have been easier. "Kang," he said. The Goa'uld light moved, not physically but in quality, a shift in the warmth that was the distributed presence's version of turning to face someone who had spoken. "Still you?" O'Neill asked. The resonance that answered him was not language and was not language. And Daniel closed his eyes for a moment and listened to it with the part of him that had once been ascended and had carried something back from that experience that he'd never found the right words for. And he understood enough of what he heard to translate it in the approximate way that a single word can translate a paragraph when the paragraph and the word are aimed at the same truth. "Yes," Daniel said quietly. "He says yes." Carter exhaled. She hadn't realized she'd been holding her breath for the last 4 minutes. She looked at her scanner, at the readings that were going to require an entirely new analytical framework to process, and felt the enormous scientific weight of what she was going to need to write in her report, and found that she was, despite everything, and in the way she always was, when the universe revealed something genuinely new, completely and helplessly fascinated. "The Teltac," Teal'c said from the entrance. "It has entered hyperspace. Anubis has withdrawn from this sector." "Voluntarily," O'Neill said, and it wasn't quite a question. "It would appear so," Teal'c said, and the weight he gave the words carried his own accounting of what that meant. Teal'c, who had served as system lord, who had spent decades assessing Goa'uld responses to threats, confirming that what had occurred in this chamber had produced an outcome he had not believed possible in his years of fighting them. Anubis, running. The Goa'uld light in the chamber moved again, and this time the movement had direction, toward the gate room, toward the Stargate that stood on the plateau outside, and the resonance it carried was not farewell and was not departure, but something that occupied the space between those things, an acknowledgement that what it was now required a different kind of movement through the galaxy than the kind that used corridors and gate addresses. O'Neill watched it go. He stood in the chamber of a 10,000-year-old ancient outpost on a world with no designation in the SGC database, on a plateau of gray stone under a sky that had never been named by the people of Earth, and he watched a man he had known for 6 days become something that the ascended ancients had decided not to be, and he thought about the things that Kang had said in the briefing room and the debrief in the Tok'ra tunnels, and one quiet moment on P4, X772, when they'd both been watching the same patrol pattern, and Kang had said, without looking at him, that O'Neill's decisions were argued about by historians for 400 years. He thought about what it meant that those arguments would continue, that the timeline Kang had come from, the one where the SGC survived and the Goa'uld were defeated and Earth built something worth building, That timeline was still there, still possible, still the trajectory they were on. He thought about the Takra operative named Soren, who in the original timeline had not survived a debrief, and who now had 6 months of additional warning and a shipyard location that would change the strategic picture of the war against Baal in ways that would take years to fully understand. He thought about Anubis retreating into hyperspace from something he had not been able to categorize or counter, and about what that meant for the months ahead, whether it bought time, whether it changed his calculations, whether the half-ascended system lord would spend the next season of his war looking over his metaphorical shoulder at a new variable in the galaxy that he couldn't measure. "Sir," Carter said, from the wall interface where she was doing the preliminary documentation that her scientific conscience required even in the immediate aftermath of the incomprehensible. "The device, it's still active. The process is complete, but the outpost is intact. The gate network connection is holding." She paused, looking at her scanner with the expression of someone who had just found a question she was going to be working on for years. "Whatever the ancients built this to do, it did it, and it's still here." "Meaning someone else could use it," Daniel said. "Meaning the door's still open," Carter said. Don O'Neill looked at the dormant device. The still rings, the dark column, the chamber that smelled of ancient stone, and something else, something that didn't have a name in any language currently spoken in the Milky Way. He thought about what Hammond was going to say when they got back. He thought about the report he was going to have to write, and about the section of that report that would be classified at a level that currently had no designation and would require one to be created. He thought about a man from 900 years in the future who had walked through an iris that nothing was supposed to walk through, who had known their names before they'd spoken them, who had fought beside SG-1 with the economy of someone who had done it before, across 11 timelines that had ended badly, and who had finally, in this one, found what he'd been looking for across 3 centuries of searching. "Let's go home," O'Neill said. They walked back through ancient corridors, past the inert coal warriors, standing in their eternal patient halt, out onto the plateau where the gray stone stretched to the horizon, and the gate stood in the shadows of ruins that were older than human civilization, the DHD waiting with the same readiness it always had. The 7 symbols that would take them back to Cheyenne Mountain, as familiar under Carter's fingers as anything in the galaxy. The 7th chevron locked. The wormhole cawooshed outward and settled. O'Neill looked at the plateau one last time, at the outpost entrance, at the ruins, at the sky above a world that still had no name, and somewhere in the gold warmth that the morning air carried, there was something that felt, whinny in the way that things feel when they are too large for direct perception, like acknowledgement. He stepped through the gate. The SGC's mission files contained multitudes, classified reports describing Asgard technology that rewrote physics textbooks, diplomatic cables from Takra operatives embedded in System Lord courts, after-action reports filed by soldiers who had walked through a ring of alien stone onto worlds that no human eye had seen before theirs. Hammond had read thousands of them. He had signed off on incidents that would have broken the public understanding of reality 6 times over, and had done so with the methodical care of a man who understood that the weight of what the program carried required someone willing to hold it steadily. He read O'Neill's report on the outpost mission 3 times. Then he opened a new classification file, assigned it a designation that had never been used before, and placed it above every existing clearance level the program possessed. He wrote 2 words in the subject line: temporal asset. In the weeks that followed, 3 things happened that the SGC would spend months connecting. The Takra operative Soren, acting on intelligence provided 6 months ahead of the original timeline schedule, identified Baal's hidden shipyard and survived to deliver the debrief that in another version of events had cost his life. Anubis withdrew his scout vessels from the ancient sector entirely, redirecting resources in patterns that Takra analysts flagged as consistent with a commander who had encountered something that required fundamental strategic reassessment. And Carter, working from scanner data recorded in the outpost chamber, began developing a theoretical framework for gate network ambient energy that would years later become the foundation of technology the SGC hadn't known it needed yet. The outpost remained active on the plateau world with no designation. The device's rings were still, the door was still open. And in the mission files, under a classification level that had required new vocabulary to create, Hammond wrote the final line of the report with the careful precision of a man recording something for historians who would need the truth of it, regardless of how long it took them to be cleared to read it. The Conqueror came through the gate seeking transcendence. He found it. The timeline he warned us about remains navigable. The threat he neutralized was real. What he became is beyond current classification frameworks, but its disposition toward Earth's defense, based on available evidence, appears to be something we might cautiously call favorable. We will proceed accordingly. Indeed.